Good morning, Luang Por.
Good morning, Ajahn Sumedho.
So today is Friday, 7th of May, 2021. And today there's a question that was asked about times when someone makes a statement that one disagrees with. What is the difference between reacting versus responding to such a statement?
Well, reaction is a very conditioned reaction to something either pleasant or unpleasant. So, when somebody says something we don't like or disagree with, have strong views about, and then we're aware of the immediate reaction we have, which can be very create more problems than before. Where a response is where we note the reaction and we don't follow it, and we patiently observe, a response to the situation either through not saying anything or just acknowledging I've heard you, and in a kind of way that you aren't creating an immediate problem with an argument and a quarrel about what you think is right and what somebody else thinks is right. So, it's just learning to be patient and know your reactions. When somebody says something you disagree with, and it's not maybe a very strong reaction of that you're all wrong, you've got it all wrong, you're an idiot, which would be very, would be a reaction that many of us feel sometimes when we hear things we don't agree with, but not to speak on it, but to be aware of it. And as you trust your awareness, then the response comes quite naturally, either through just being silent or responding in a way that isn't argumentative or insulting to the person whose view you object to. So it's like in training as a monk, we all have to develop right speech, as one of the training rules that we have. And so we do have reactions to things we very strongly disagree with or don't like, or to people who we find obnoxious. But I found that just by following these reactions, I create more problems. And so I've trained myself to be aware of the reaction, not to recognize that mentally, this happens when somebody says something this way, I feel this reaction is like this. But then as I trust my awareness, I can respond to the situation in a skillful way that doesn't create more problems than there were before.
I guess one of the things that comes up in these situations is a sense of self-righteousness. And that's something that we all can relate to. Can you say something about that?
Yes, it's being right and wrong. When we absolutize, when we make right and wrong into absolute moral absolutes, then we're stuck with a position. And reflecting on the way things are, right and wrong are conditions that arise and cease. They're not absolutes. Nobody's absolutely right or absolutely wrong, but these are relative to time and place. And so, one finds in daily life, in religious communities, or anywhere, the righteous indignation can be a very strong reaction to things we feel are wrong and sinful and evil, and the desire to destroy and wipe out the evil forces in the universe can sound very righteous, and in one way it's right, but it's impossible. You know, on ideal level, goodness is the best and evil is the worst. And so we're saddled with this dualistic language that we think in, which is if you've got right, then the opposite is wrong. If you've got good, you've got bad. Heaven, you've got hell. And the mindful response to righteousness is to be aware of one's sense of I'm right and you're wrong. In spiritual practice and in any religion, there's a strong sense of righteousness. Like we all are trained in the early years of monastic training to know the right reactions to speech and action, and what's wrong, what's evil, what's a sin, what's an offense, and so we're trained very thoroughly in these what's right and what isn't, and so then we tend to cling to having very strong views of righteous views about our life, and can be quite insensitive to time and place, because this clinging to views blinds us to the realities of the here and now, the time, the place, the people we're with, the situation that we're experiencing is like this. And so that's where mindfulness is our ability to reflect on this. What is it like to feel righteous? To feel I'm right, absolutely right. And when you start looking at that particular mood or state of mind, it is a lot of suffering to always have to be right and set everyone else right by preaching at them, by telling them how they should behave and what's right, and if they don't agree, they're wrong. This can be, people of this nature are really quite offensive, even though they have right intentions. They don't have mindfulness or wisdom to know the time and place, and to recognize their own attachment to the views about righteousness. And this is a very important issue, because we're all conditioned in this way to hold strong views about the left side of the political spectrum or the right side. And in the mass media, daily news, you hear all these strong views about the right side, the conservative side, or the liberal left side, and each side has its own strong position to take. And, both take very righteous positions, but with wisdom, we can reflect on that in our own experience with life as we live our lives. We're going to feel right and wrong the same as anyone else, but wisdom is aware of this feeling is a condition we create. And if we just react out of just our own righteousness, sometimes we can be very offensive, very insensitive to the situation, the people, the conditions that we're experiencing in the present. And as we are mindful, we let go of our sense of righteousness, and then we can respond in a suitable way, in a way that is right to the conditions of the present situation. So remember that we experience always in the present moment is here. the place is always here, the time is always now, and the people we're with are the way they are. We can't just be with people who agree with everything we say or think or feel. We have to live in a society with many different views, many different opinions, many different characters that we like or don't like, appreciate or don't appreciate. And so what are we going to do in a maelstrom of change and confusion between right and wrong, good and bad, acceptance, unacceptance, except witness to it? This is the path of wisdom where we reflect and observe, and we learn from ourselves, our own grasping of righteousness. Is that really peaceful? Do you always have to be right? Do you find your relationships with others very unfulfilling because even the people close to you aren't always agreeing with you? You feel at odds with the world because it doesn't fit your sense of righteousness and what should be? And you can be aware of this grasping of views of being right or being wrong, and see that it's the grasping that's the problem. And the solution is to let go of righteousness. That doesn't mean destroying it. It means to release your grip on it, your total identity with it, and trust in awareness, trust in Dhamma, trust in the reality of this moment to respond to particular difficult situations you're experiencing.
You mentioned how self-righteousness comes in with views, whether it's religious views or political views. There's another type of dynamic, just more social dynamic. Like we can see in monasteries, such as here, between people, individuals or small groups of people, but in families as well. When we think someone is not behaving, they should be behaving, or they're not the way we think they should be, and we can find ourselves feeling very self-righteous about they should be otherwise. And this can create a lot of disharmony in either monasteries between individuals, but also in families, between brothers and sisters, children and parents.
Yes, in a monastery like here at Amaravati, you have a real opportunity to observe. All bhikkhus know what a proper bhikkhu should be, according to the ideal. And lay people project all kinds of righteous views onto us, about being perfectly kind and wise and good and moral and just, and these are all right, good projections. And then when they see us not living up to their standards of excellence, then they become disillusioned. Or the monks, if we make judgments, value judgments about other monks, we aren't being aware of what we're doing. When you try to, even though this particular form of Buddhism is very conforming, we shave our heads, wear the same color of robes, keep, the same standard of moral discipline, the Vinaya. So on the externals, you've got incredible conformity. So that, is the standard that we agree to when we enter this particular convention. But mentally, we're all different. Different characters, different genders, different cultural identities, national identities, different racial identities. All these identities that we hold to are going to be all different. There's no two monks, two nuns the same. You can't have carbon copies of monks or nuns, and we aren't ideals. We're not images of perfection like a Buddha Rupa is. But a Buddha Rupa doesn't feel anything. We've got these beautiful images of the Buddha on our shrines, but they don't see, hear, smell, taste, touch. They don't have blood flowing through their veins or nervous systems, or they don't get hungry or have any bodily functions to deal with. They can be perfect images. They're ideals, they're beautiful, but recognize the realities of the human form is like this. It's not an ideal form. It's a changing condition. And that changes the personalities, the views, the sense of an isolated self, a gender identity, a religious identity, a class identity can all be very different from one being to the next. And the differences of sankharas, of conditions, of phenomena that are changing. And so when we take the position of a separate personality with strong views about right and wrong and holding to ideal views about how the world should be or how a good monk or a good nun should be, then we're going to be constantly frustrated because that's not the way life happens and that's not the way monasteries really operate. So we learn, I've learned so much being the abbot of a monastery where you have an ideal for what the monastery should be when you start. And then you just have to deal with life as it happens, that different personalities, different characters ordain or asked to come and live in the monastery, and they aren't always agreeable or, don't fit in with my personal views about how someone should be. I can observe that. I can observe my own prejudices that arise or condition reactions to individuals as it happens. And then that's a wisdom response to the confusing situations of the samsara, of the changing conditions that we strongly identify with. And therefore the encouragement to seek the identity with ultimate reality, with Dhamma. We take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha rather than in personal views and ideals that can be very different or very perfect in many ways from one person to the next. But in these terms of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, they're not personal terms. We don't think we're Buddhas. We don't say we're Dhammas. We can say we're Sanghas, and some perfect view of a Sangha in perfect harmony practicing meditation together is an ideal. But the reality of living together as a Sangha of monastics is like this. And we begin to open wide to the way life is and happens, rather than seeing life through the narrow view of my view is right and I've got to make the rest of the world conform to what I think is right is a definite invitation to make your life utterly miserable for the rest of your life, because life isn't going to allow that to happen. We learn as we grow older too, as we lose our idealistic attachments and open to life as a changing reality that we can witness to and learn from, rather than trying to transform it and change it according to our own narrow views of right and wrong.
And then within sort of more family dynamics between...
The same with families. You know, how many parents suffer because their children aren't behaving them? And how many children suffer because their parents don't seem to understand them, or they think they don't? You know, because children are they've got their own karmic conditions to deal with. They're not going to be exactly what the ideal children you imagine before they're born. You know, the idea, I imagine, when you get married, of having a family, you have, you know, ideal girls and boy children, and they fit into your pattern of, you know, ideal personalities, and you worry, you know, you can worry, parents worry about their children endlessly because they may not conform to their ideal of what's considered normal in a society, because like every society has its what consider, you know, its ideal of normality. But what is normality? Is it an ideal? You know, you know, we can have a very strict view of what's a normal boy or a normal girl, but it's still a viewpoint. And boys and girls grow up, you know, as individuals with their own particular karmic inheritance, whatever that might be. And it may not be what you expected or wanted, you know, because you in the news, the media, mass media, you read about all kinds of problems arising in families because of transgender children or homophobic parents and things like this, because these are the views of normality that the society or the parents are holding to. And so, you know, what do you do when your children don't conform to the way what you believe is right? You can observe that. You know, do you have to be right? Do you have to impose on your children your own views and make them feel guilty or unwanted or rejected because they don't conform to an ideal you have of what a normal boy or girl should be? You know, in wisdom practice, we can observe this. We all have our biases that are condition, our cultural conditioning, social conditioning, you get when you're an innocent child. You know, you get that from your parents, from your family, from the class that you're born into. Your racial identity is very defined. You know, the absolute holding to views about gender, you know, are very part of a cultural conditioning process. But are they always right or always, or is it wrong, you know, or are right and wrong relative to conditions, to time and place? So in a family, you know, like in a family must learn from the way their children are. Children must learn from the way their parents are, not to expect your parents to be the perfect, ideal parents that you can imagine, but parents are working out their karma too, you know, whatever that might be, because the conditioned realm is all about karma. It's about cause and effect, about birth and death, about conditioning that you receive through the sense of a separate self and personal identity, through cultural conditioning, through social, religious conditioning. We're all conditioned to hold to certain views that are considered normal and right in a particular cultural setting. And they don't always fit into other cultural settings. For those of us who have lived in different cultures, it's very interesting to observe, you know, just coming from the West Coast United States to live in a Thai forest monastery, totally different cultural culture and the conditioning of Thai culture and Thai monasticism was completely strange to a West Coast youthful American. So, it did mirror my own particular attitudes and reactions to living within a society that reacted very different to many of the things that I experienced. But not everyone has the good fortune to live in different cultures, but we can learn from the culture we're in to realize it is conditioned. Patriotism, nationalism, class identity are all conditioned into us when we're young. As part of a plan, a cultural plan, an agreement among masses of people that their particular culture is this way, and that other cultures that don't quite fit into their ideal forms are inferior, or we can be very condescending or arrogant or conceited in regarding our own views about right and wrong and what's normal and what is abnormal. But what is normal? What is ultimately normal without a view of normality is awareness, it's consciousness itself. It's completely normal because, when you're born conscious. A newborn infant is a fully conscious form before it becomes a personality, before it has a cultural identity, before it has a language. So this is using the word normality and not seeing it as the status quo of a particular class or social identity or racial identity, but seeing normality we all share. Whatever our personality, our cultural identity might be, no matter how eccentric or conforming it might be to particular situations, we're ultimately everyone's normal, and that is what we begin to recognize. And then we learn to expand our acceptance of the differences in character tendencies, in inherited tendencies, in gender identities and so forth. We begin to no longer hold to a fixed view of what's normal and what isn't, because we no longer have a view about it. We know through wisdom, normality is like this. It's awareness, it's mindfulness. And then the eccentricities, the strangeness, the madness, the abnormalities, as well as the conformities and all the other mental conditions are acquired, are conditioned. And so we learn to understand them. They are what they are. They arise and they cease. They're sankharas, they're phenomena that are changing, and not a solid, real person, but the conditions that individuals are experiencing cannot be exactly the same from one individual to the other. So you become, this is a way of spreading metta, of loving kindness, of accepting life, rather than just trying to make life conform to your own particular narrow position on it, of some ideal that you hold fastly to and believe in totally without question, without mindfulness, without wisdom.
Thank you very much.